bombing attack, anything can happen. Your supply lines disrupted, your equipment blown to hell, some of your outfit lost. Whatever happens, you've still got to carry out your mission, making bread. More than any other food, bread will aid in giving energy to our men and help them destroy our enemies. Suppose your fuel supply is hit and wiped out. It's tough luck, but it's not going to stop the fighting. It's not going to stop men from getting hungry. Believe it or not, you've got to know more than baking to be a good baker in the Army. You've got to be a jack of all trades. You've got to be able to improvise, to make use of salvaged materials, to think on your feet and think fast. Their fuel supply gone, this crew disassembles its ovens. The lower section containing the proofing and burner chambers is removed. Its usefulness now gone. Clear and measure off the ground so that the upper section can be placed over a fire pit 8 feet long, 20 inches wide, and 3 1/2 feet deep. The pit must be dug so it can support the oven and contain a fire which will give adequate heat. An example of improvising is the use of strings from old flour sacks to mark out the pit. Because this oven was not primarily designed to use wood fuel, it is necessary to add insulation to its base. Here's one way of doing it. It's not the only one, but it will work. Take some old flimsies or shortening cans and convert them into a flat sheet, the size and shape of the oven bottom. To make a single sheet of sufficient size, lock the sections together. Cut 2 openings in them similar in size to the oven flues, and an additional opening for a smokestack. While the pit is being dug, the spoil is left close at hand, for it will later be used as packing and insulation for the oven. In one corner of the fire pit, a hole should be dug of sufficient depth to insert a pail or can. This will collect any drain water seeping into the pit. It will also help keep the fire going in rainy weather. To make certain that the walls of the pit do not cave in under the weight of the oven, space and firmly embed 3 log braces across the top. This will serve also to hold the insulation in place. One of the metal sheets is now placed over the pit. Over this, spread a 2-inch layer of dirt. To contain this dirt, a second sheet is added. This sandwich of metal and dirt acts as insulation and will direct the flow of heat into the oven flues. We are now ready to place the oven over the pit. Make sure the holes of the flues are placed exactly over the holes of the metal. In order to prevent heat escaping, take mud and seal the outside of the oven where it rests on the sheet metal. To prevent flash heat, which would cause uneven baking, place a layer of dirt in the bottom oven chamber. Now form a soft cake of mud around the outside opening of the sheet metal. Improvise a smokestack, perhaps from an old milk can, and seal it over the opening. The top of the can can be used as a damper to control the draft. The other oven is set up in a like manner. Before beginning the mixing operation, every man makes it his business to wash up. Field bread is made with flour, water, salt, yeast, sugar, and shortening. If necessary, it can be made without sugar and shortening. If dehydrated yeast is used, add a proportionate amount of sugar for food and soak in tempered water for 45 minutes. Our formula, which will make 48 pounds of field bread, calls for 35 pounds of flour and a proportionate amount of the other ingredients. In every step of baking, care must be taken to be accurate. To lighten the flour and to remove any impurities, it is sifted into the fermentation can. Now, weigh out the proper amount of salt and sugar. The water is tempered so that it will give a temperature of between 78 and 82 degrees to the dough when finally mixed. In weighing out your water, take time. Be precise. Good bread will only result from ingredients which are in proper balance with each other. Dissolve the salt and sugar in the tempered water. Bank the flour to one side of the fermentation can so that a channel is formed. This simplifies mixing when the solution is poured in. The water containing salt and sugar is added. Now roll up your sleeves and start mixing. This is an extremely important step in the making of good bread. In a hand mix, there is little danger of overmixing, but a great tendency to undermix. Undermixing causes irregular fermentation, streaks in the bread, coarse cell structure, and poor volume. You've got to make your hand take the place of the agitator arms of the mixer. The texture, color, and flavor of the bread is largely dependent upon how thorough your job is. Be exacting. Sweat a little if necessary. The result will be worthwhile. The crisscross turning and the strangling motion help the flour in absorbing the water. When the flour and solution start to form a mass, the yeast is added. Waiting until this time assures us that the salt has been sufficiently dissolved and dispersed throughout the mass so that it cannot harm the yeast. Continue to mix until there is a uniform consistency. Here you must be thorough. You can't afford to be half-hearted in your efforts. Now cream the shortening and add to the mass. The shortening wasn't added before because it would have interfered with flour absorbing the water and might have made a lumpy dough. Neither can we wait much longer, for the dough might then become stringy or tough. The object of mixing is to get a uniform mixture of ingredients, to bring about the formation and development of gluten in the dough, to distribute the yeast evenly, and finally, to provide food for the yeast throughout the mass. Turning the dough is another means of ensuring a good mix. In order to make certain that all ingredients are thoroughly distributed throughout the mass, the dough can be cut into 5-pound pieces and developed further. In working the dough with your hands, use a crisscross stretching motion. This aids in the formation and development of the gluten, so necessary in making good bread. Now return the dough to the fermentation can, where each piece is worked into the next one until once again it's a single mass. If necessary, the cutting process can be repeated in order to ensure a thorough job. To be positive the dough is uniform throughout, draw the sides into the center and turn several times. To prevent the dough sticking to the sides of the can during its fermentation period, remove it, scrape the walls, then grease over lightly. In returning the dough to the can, it's well to have the loose ends underneath. This gives a smooth surface which aids the fermentation process and dough development. Record the time mixed and the temperature on your dough sheet. The first rise will take about 2.5 hours. Photographically, we have speeded up the rising of the dough caused by carbon dioxide gas, which is formed by the yeast cells acting upon sugars in the mass. To determine proper punching time, insert your fingers in the dough. If it wrinkles and sinks slightly, it is ready. Punching equalizes the temperature of the dough. The yeast is brought in contact with new food and oxygen. Excess gases are driven out, and the stretching quality of the gluten is improved. When the punching is finished, record the time and allow the dough to rise again for about 45 minutes. During this second rise, the dough continues to work toward its maximum development. Wherever possible, use hard wood in firing the oven. This gives a steady heat and very little smoke. At the end of the fermentation period, dump the dough on the molding table and divide it into pieces weighing 4 pounds, 8 ounces each. In proofing and baking, about 8 ounces of dough will be lost, mostly through evaporation. The result will be 4-pound loaves of field bread. Now round each piece into a ball by bringing the ends in toward the center. This process forces out the excess gas, ensures an even grain, and forms a thin skin around the dough which acts as a seal to retain moisture and permit expansion of the gluten. Rounding 2 pieces at once saves time. This skill can be acquired with practice. Put 3 pieces in each bake pan to rest for about 15 minutes, or until they have loosened up enough for the dough to be rounded again. During this time, to prevent the surface of the dough from crusting, retain moisture, and also to keep out dust, flour sacks are used to cover the pans. Because we are not using the lower section of the oven containing the proofing chambers, it is necessary for us to make a proof box by using a bread rack and its canvas cover. When the intermediate proofing period has been completed, the dough is rounded again. This gives it its final form. Two pieces are placed in each pan and allowed to loosen up for about 5 minutes. Then each piece is separated from the other and from the side walls by at least 1/2 inch of space. They are flattened to about 1.5 inches. This prevents them from becoming balloon-shaped and makes them more suitable for transportation. Move the pans to the proof rack. Steam, which assists the proofing process, can be made by dropping hot rocks into anything containing water. To retain as much of the steam and moisture as possible, close or tighten the canvas cover. When the dough has been fully proofed, it is made ready for the oven by washing the top of the dough lightly with water. This will assist in giving elasticity to the surface so that when the heat hits it, the crust will not break open. Docking or puncturing the top of the dough with a finger is done to permit excess gases generated during the first few minutes of baking to escape. The loaded bake pans are then placed in the oven chambers, which have already been brought to 425 degrees. To ensure a more even bake, at the end of each half hour, switch your pans around. The left and center pans are turned and their positions exchanged. The pan on the right is simply turned around. A good baking temperature is 375 degrees for this oven. An hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes of baking time will give a thorough bake. To be doubly sure that your bread is done, tap the bottom of it. A hollow drum-like sound indicates it's okay.